The signal was small at first, just a whisper in the endless dark of space. It came from a distant world, far beyond the known trade routes and military borders. No one expected it to be anything important. In space, signals come and go all the time. Some are echoes of old civilizations that no longer exist. Some are just noise, static from stars that died long ago. But this one was different. It carried something that machines could not fake, a voice full of fear and hope at the same time. The words were trembling, almost breaking apart between sobs. The message said, "To whoever can hear us, please help. We are dying. We don't want war. We just want compassion." Those words traveled for light years through silence and dust, until they reached a blue planet that had been watching the stars for centuries. Earth. When the signal was first received, scientists didn't even believe it was real. The instruments were checked again and again. The message repeated every few hours in a strange but clear rhythm. It wasn't a trick of space or interference. It was a cry for help, from someone who truly existed. The people of Earth had seen messages before. Old broadcasts, strange blips, coded data. But this one hit differently. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't an invasion threat. It was a plea from beings who didn't even know who they were speaking to. The transmission was sent to world governments, research stations, and eventually to the Terran Council, the new alliance that represented all nations under one flag. By that time, humanity had already reached the stars. Not far, but far enough to understand how vast and empty space really was. The Terran Council had explorers, scientists, and fleets of ships ready to travel across systems. But what they didn't have was trust from the rest of the galaxy. Humans were known for their stubbornness, their aggression, and their dangerous courage. They were survivors from a death world, a planet full of storms, diseases, predators, and wars. Other civilizations whispered about them in fear, calling them the Terran monsters. It wasn't a title humanity gave themselves, it was something they had earned, unintentionally through history written in blood and struggle. And yet, when the Council replayed that message in the Grand Hall, the room went silent. The voice of the alien was soft, fragile, almost childlike. It didn't sound like a species ready for war. It sounded like a species that had never known what cruelty felt like until now. For a long time, no one spoke. Some wanted to ignore it. Others said it could be a trap. But a few, the ones who had seen suffering up close, knew that the pain in that voice was real. Earth had its share of cruelty. People had once destroyed each other over land, beliefs, and power. They had known hunger, fear, loss, and regret. Maybe that's why the message touched something deep inside them. Because behind that plea for compassion, they heard something familiar, the sound of someone about to lose everything. Meetings began, plans were drafted, and debates stretched for days. Should humanity get involved? Should they risk their lives for beings they had never met? Was compassion worth traveling across the stars for? But there was one truth that kept repeating in the halls of command. If we don't answer this, then what kind of people have we become? In the end, the Council voted. The decision was made. Earth would answer the call, but the way they answered would surprise the entire galaxy. They didn't send diplomats or poets or peacekeepers. They didn't send speeches filled with promises. They sent people who understood what it meant to lose everything and still stand up again. The team chosen to represent humanity wasn't made of politicians. They were people who had seen the worst side of their own species and still believed in doing the right thing. Soldiers who had fought to protect. Engineers who had rebuilt broken cities. Medics who had carried wounded children through fire. They were tough. They were scarred. They were human. When the news went public, reactions were mixed. Some thought it was a mistake. They asked for compassion, a reporter said on a broadcast, not for warriors. Others disagreed. Who knows compassion better than those who've suffered? One general replied. As the fleet prepared for departure, the message continued to play in the background of every command room. The alien voice, still pleading softly, still begging for someone to understand. Out in the cold vacuum of space, the ships waited, sleek and dark, their engines glowing faintly like hearts ready to beat. People on Earth gathered to watch the launch. Families, students, workers, even the old veterans who thought they had seen everything. Everyone looked up at the sky. It wasn't about power anymore. It wasn't about conquest or proving dominance. For once in their long, complicated history, humanity was united by something pure, Empathy. When the countdown began, the ground rumbled. Flames and smoke filled the air. The ships rose slowly, breaking through the atmosphere, carrying with them not just people but the weight of a world's promise. Inside the main ship, silence ruled. Each crew member stared out at the stars, wondering what they would find. None of them expected gratitude. None expected glory. They were not heroes, they were simply answering a call. The stars passed by in endless streams of light. Days turned into weeks. The signal grew stronger as they neared its source. But so did the unease. Reports from deep space probes showed signs of destruction. Burned cities, empty oceans, shattered satellites. Whatever had happened there, it wasn't just war. It was annihilation. And yet the message still played. Someone down there was still alive, still believing that somewhere out there kindness existed. The closer they came, the heavier the silence grew inside the ships. Humans were not known for gentleness. Even when they meant well, their strength frightened others. Their history was full of stories about how they saved themselves by being dangerous. What if these fragile beings misunderstood them? What if their help looked more like another invasion? But the decision had been made. They couldn't turn back now. As they entered orbit, the view filled the screens. An ocean-blue world covered in clouds and fire. Parts of the planet glowed red where cities once stood. Others were dark, lifeless. Only a few small areas still showed signs of life. No one spoke. The captain gave a quiet order to scan for survivors. Minutes passed. Then a voice came through the comms. A trembling whisper, the same one they had heard before. "Please, and we're still here." Every human in that room froze. It was no longer a recording. It was live. For a moment, time stood still. Then the captain looked up, her voice steady but soft. "Tell them," she said, "that they've been heard." Across the planet, the survivors looked up at the dark sky and saw streaks of light descending. To them, it looked like angels falling from heaven, but they would soon learn. Those weren't angels. They were humans. The ones other civilizations had warned about. The ones called Terran monsters. And yet on that broken planet, those so-called monsters were answering a prayer for compassion. They came not because they wanted glory, but because they remembered what it felt like to be desperate. Because once, a long time ago, humanity had pleaded for compassion too, and someone had listened. In that moment, the story of two worlds began to intertwine. One that had never known cruelty, and one that had built its strength from surviving it. Neither would ever be the same again. The signal had brought humanity together in a way no war or treaty ever could. For the first time in many generations, all nations on Earth spoke as one. Every person, no matter where they came from, felt the same quiet pull inside when they heard that trembling voice from across the stars. It wasn't just a message. It was a reminder that pain and hope existed far beyond their own world. At first, people thought Earth would send scientists. Maybe diplomats, those who could talk, reason, and show kindness. But the decision was different. The Terran Council didn't want to send words. They wanted to send proof that compassion was not weakness. They wanted to show that humanity's kindness came with strength behind it. Across the world, selected crews were called from different branches: explorers, healers, engineers, and soldiers. Each one carried scars from their past, the kind that never fully fade. They had seen destruction, fear, and cruelty. They knew what it meant to lose everything and still keep moving forward. They were not chosen for perfection. They were chosen for understanding. When the announcement went public, the reaction was mixed. Some people celebrated, saying it was time humanity gave back to the universe. Others feared it. "They asked for compassion," a commentator said on a global broadcast, "and we're sending our warriors." What kind of message is that? But there was an older voice that spoke louder than all. It said, "Sometimes compassion needs hands that have been burned before. Sometimes the only ones who can understand pain are those who've survived it." That was enough. The launch was set. While the fleet prepared, the message from the alien world continued to play on repeat. The voice was breaking, softer now, as if whoever was speaking was fading away. "We are still here," it said. "Please, if you can hear us. We don't want to fight anymore." It played in every command center, every training hall, every living room that could pick up the broadcast. Even children listened quietly, asking their parents if the people out there would be okay. Then came the day of departure. The ship stood tall and silent in orbit. lined up like silver arrows waiting to be released. Down below, millions of people watched. No one really knew what waited out there. The maps showed nothing but darkness. The distance was so great that light itself took years to travel. But the fleet would go anyway. Humans had never been the kind to wait for safety. As the engines roared to life, the sky burned with light. Those on the ground felt it shake through their chests like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Some waved, some prayed, and some simply whispered, "Come back." Inside the ships, the atmosphere was quiet. The crews weren't cheering or celebrating. They just looked out the windows at the shrinking blue world behind them. That little planet had seen so much. Wars, peace, love, loss, and now it was sending its children into the unknown. The journey was long. In deep space, days blurred together. The stars looked close, but they were impossibly far. The crews spent their time reading old transmissions, running drills, or just sitting in silence. The alien message was replayed again and again, each time sinking deeper into their hearts. No one spoke about it, but they all felt the same unease. The message didn't sound like it came from a species ready to fight. It sounded like the cry of someone who had already lost too much. When they finally reached the coordinates, the view outside their windows changed. The target planet came into sight, a pale, shining sphere surrounded by rings of dust. But something was wrong. Large parts of the surface glowed red like open wounds. Clouds of smoke covered entire continents. The atmosphere was fractured, full of debris and silence. Sensors picked up life signs, faint, scattered, and weak. Whatever had happened there, it had nearly wiped everything out. No one spoke for a long time. They had seen destruction before, but never like this. The readings told a story no one wanted to believe. Cities had been burned, oceans poisoned, entire regions erased. And yet, through all that, one small beacon still pulsed from the planet's surface. It was the source of the message, the same desperate voice calling into the dark. The captain gave the order. The fleet would descend. As the first ships entered the atmosphere, they could see the truth more clearly. The cities were built like glass and light, delicate structures that must have been beautiful once. Now they were silent ruins. Fires burned where the sky had been torn apart. One of the officers whispered, "They never stood a chance." The scanners soon detected survivors, weak and scattered in small groups. The Terrans didn't wait for permission, they started to land. They had come all this way not to conquer, but to help. When the ships touched the ground, the air was still thick with dust. The alien sky glowed a strange purple, and the wind carried ashes that glimmered like snow. The humans stepped out, heavy boots pressing into soil that had never known them. They didn't look like angels or saviors. They looked like armored giants, faces hidden behind dark visors, their steps echoing across the broken plains. From a distance, they could easily be mistaken for invaders. But the first thing they did wasn't to draw weapons. It was to set up shelters. Teams moved quickly, unfolding tents, scanning for survivors, setting up medical stations. The medics carried supplies, the engineers began purifying water, and the soldiers stood watch not to attack, but to protect. They called out into the ruins using translation devices, repeating soft messages into the wind. "We are here to help. You are safe now. Don't be afraid." At first, no one answered. Then, after hours of searching, a sound came from a collapsed structure, a faint cry. The team rushed toward it, clearing debris until they found them. A small group of beings huddled together, shaking, eyes wide with fear. Their skin was pale and translucent, glowing faintly under the strange light. They were thinner, smaller, and far more fragile than humans. When they saw the Terrans, they froze in terror. They had expected saviors of light and peace, not towering figures covered in metal. One of them tried to crawl away, whispering something in their language. The translator caught the words, "Please, not again." The humans stopped moving. One of them knelt down slowly, removing their helmet. The alien flinched, expecting pain, but instead the human reached out with an open hand. The voice that spoke was calm and gentle. "You're safe now. We heard you." The aliens didn't understand all the words, but they felt the tone. They looked into the human's tired eyes, eyes that had seen war and loss, and something changed. One of the small creatures reached forward, trembling, and touched the human's hand. Their skin was cold, but their eyes filled with tears. It was the first contact between their species. And it wasn't written in words or technology. It was written in emotion. The medics immediately began tending to the wounded. They worked for hours without rest, giving water, warmth, and care. The soldiers stayed close, watching the skies for danger. Every movement was careful, every gesture slow. Humanity had learned long ago that trust takes time. Back on the ships, reports began to pour in. More survivors found, more shelters built. But the deeper they went into the planet's surface, the clearer the truth became. The invaders who had done this were still out there. They had left machines behind, remnants of destruction, still active, still searching. The Terrans knew it wouldn't be long before they had to fight. But for now, their focus was simple: save as many lives as possible. Night fell on that world, and the alien survivors looked up at the dark sky. They saw the Terran ships hovering silently above, their lights glowing like stars. For the first time since the war began, the survivors felt something they had forgotten existed: hope. And as they watched the humans work tirelessly through the night, patching wounds, building fires, comforting the scared, it became clear to them that the ones called monsters were not what the galaxy had claimed. Yes, they were strong, and yes, they carried weapons. But under all that armor there was something far greater: compassion born from pain. The Illyri, as the alien race was known, didn't yet understand these humans. They couldn't know what kind of history had shaped them, but in that quiet, shattered night, they learned one truth that would stay with them forever. Sometimes the most frightening beings are the only ones who truly know how to be kind. The first sunrise on that world was strange to the Terrans. The sky glowed in soft purple shades, and the light bent in ways their eyes weren't used to. The air carried a faint hum, as if the planet itself was whispering. But beneath that beauty was destruction. Entire cities lay in ruins, and the ground still trembled with the echoes of old battles. The Terran ships stood in formation above the land, their dark metal shapes casting long shadows across the broken surface. To the surviving Illyri, it was a sight both terrifying and hopeful. They had prayed for help, but they never imagined it would come like this. To them, the humans looked like nightmares come to life. Their bodies were strong, their movements heavy and precise. Every step left marks in the soft soil. They didn't speak much, and when they did, their voices were low, calm, and strange. The Illyri watched from behind shattered walls, unsure if these new arrivals had come to save them, or to finish what their enemies had started. But actions speak louder than words. The Terrans didn't come to rule. They came to rebuild. The first thing they did was set up medical shelters. The humans moved quickly, setting down tents, medical pods, and warm lights. They carried boxes of supplies on their backs and worked with a quiet focus. When an injured Illyri was brought in, they didn't hesitate. They cleaned wounds, applied patches, and used machines that hummed with soft light. The Illyri had never seen anything like it. The Terrans' technology looked harsh and simple, metal and wires, but it worked like magic. Within hours, lives that had been fading were brought back. The humans didn't ask for thanks. They just kept working. One human, covered in dust and exhaustion, sat beside a small Illyri who could barely breathe. The creature's thin chest rose and fell in uneven gasps. The human gently adjusted the oxygen mask and whispered something softly. The words were simple, something about holding on, about staying alive. The alien didn't understand the language, but somehow it understood the meaning. When the Illyri child finally opened its eyes, a quiet ripple of hope passed through the camp. That moment spread faster than any signal. Survivors whispered it from one hiding place to another. The Terrans are helping us. They saved one of ours. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about belief. But not everyone was ready to trust. The Illyri leaders, weak and broken from the war, were brought to the Terran command post. They were delicate beings with faces that shimmered under the light. They moved carefully as if every step might break them. Their eyes, wide and full of confusion, scanned the room filled with metal and unfamiliar sounds. When they saw the Terran commander, their fear deepened. The human stood tall, dressed in battle armor that looked like it was built for a storm. His face was tired, his voice deep and steady. The translator worked between them, turning harsh human words into soft Illyri speech. "You called for help," the commander said. "We came," the Illyri leader hesitated before replying. "We asked for compassion, not destruction." The room went silent for a moment. The commander nodded slowly, as if he understood more than he wanted to admit. Compassion, he said, is why we're here. But to protect it, we may have to destroy what caused your pain. The Illyri couldn't understand how both could exist together, kindness and violence. But the humans did. It was written all over their faces. Outside the command tent, the camp grew busier. Terran engineers were building water lines and power systems. Others cleared the ruins, stacking broken materials into neat piles. The Illyri, slowly regaining strength, began to help. They learned by watching how to use tools, how to fix simple things. It was the first time the two species worked side by side. One day, as they worked to repair a collapsed shelter, an Illyri hesitated near a human carrying a large steel beam. The human stopped, noticing the fear. He placed the beam down gently, showing his empty hands. The Illyri blinked, confused. The human smiled slightly and offered the tool handle. The alien reached out, their small hand trembling, and took it. That single act, simple, quiet, human, changed everything. By evening, more Illyri joined the humans at work. They moved together, rebuilt together. The humans taught them how to secure structures, how to store food, how to make fire safely again. The Illyri, in turn, showed them how to filter air using natural plants, how to find water hidden under the ground. Two completely different worlds began to understand one another through survival. But not all the news was good. Terran scouts reported strange readings from the north. Machines still active. Signals that didn't belong to the Illyri. They were remnants of the invading force that had destroyed the planet. The Terrans knew what that meant. Trouble was coming. Still, they didn't speak of it to the survivors. The humans didn't want to spread more fear. They just prepared quietly, setting up perimeter defenses and positioning watchtowers under the cover of rebuilding. At night, the Illyri would gather around the fires the humans built. They were amazed at the warmth, at the light that danced. On their world, fire had always been a thing of fear. It destroyed their forests and homes. But here, under Terran guidance, it became comfort. They sat close, whispering stories, while the humans stood watch beyond the circle of light. Sometimes a curious Illyri would ask questions through the translator. "Why do you wear armor if you came to heal?" one asked. The human who answered took off a glove, revealing a scar on their hand. "Because sometimes," they said softly, "to protect what's gentle, you need to survive what's cruel." That answer spread quietly among the Illyri. They began to see the Terrans differently, not as monsters, but as beings who had survived their own storms. Days turned into weeks. The camps grew larger, safer. The wounded healed, and the terrified began to laugh again. Children played near the Terran vehicles, fascinated by the humans' strange gear. One even climbed up on a metal crate and pretended to command a ship, mimicking human gestures. The soldiers laughed quietly, their rough faces softening for a moment. It was small moments like that, simple, human and pure, that built trust faster than any treaty ever could. But every night, when the sky turned dark and the fires dimmed, the humans would gather quietly away from the rest. They spoke in low tones, reviewing data and preparing for what they all knew was coming. The machines of the invaders were moving again. Drones, weapon systems, signals, they were waking up. The Terrans were ready. They had come to help, but they knew that compassion sometimes had to be protected by strength. Still, they didn't tell the Illyri. Not yet. They wanted to give them more days of peace before the storm. One evening, the Illyri leader walked into the human camp carrying a glowing stone. It was a symbol from their culture, a token of thanks. The leader placed it in the commander's hands and said through the translator, "Your people, you are strong, but your eyes carry sorrow. Why do you help strangers like us?" The commander looked at the small, fragile being before him and took a long breath. "Because once we were the ones crying for help, and someone, somewhere, answered." The Illyri didn't know who had helped humanity in the past, but they understood the feeling. Gratitude filled their heart, though a quiet fear remained. What kind of world had created such powerful beings who spoke of kindness but moved like storms? The humans didn't look for worship or fame. They just kept working side by side until one night alarms broke the calm. The sky flashed red as the outer sensors detected movement. Metallic signals, dozens, maybe hundreds, were approaching from the horizon. The commander gave the order quietly. "All units prepare positions. Protect the camps." The humans didn't panic. They had seen worse. But the Illyri, hearing the distant rumble, trembled. They ran to the shelters, clutching one another in fear. The Terrans stood outside, their armor reflecting the burning horizon. The same hands that had built and healed all day now gripped weapons with steady focus. As the first machines appeared in the distance, crawling across the dark plains, the Illyri watched from behind the barricades. They thought back to their prayer, their message of compassion, and wondered if they had made a mistake. But then they saw it. The humans, standing shoulder to shoulder, facing the oncoming storm not with hatred, but with purpose. They didn't fight out of rage. They fought to defend. They fought to protect the weak, even if it meant risking everything. For the first time, the Illyri began to understand what compassion meant to humans. It wasn't soft. It wasn't easy. It was strong, fierce, and unbreakable. As the night filled with light and thunder, the survivors realized that the ones they had once feared, the so-called Terran monsters, were the only ones who had ever truly come for them. The night had turned into fire. The peaceful glow of the Terran camp was replaced by flashes of light that lit up the sky like silent storms. The ground shook under the weight of distant explosions, and the air was thick with dust and electricity. The Illyri, still fragile from their suffering, huddled inside shelters as the Terrans stood between them and the darkness. No one screamed. No one panicked. The humans moved with calm purpose, their faces hidden behind dark visors. Every motion was measured, every order quiet but firm. They had been through nights like this before, on Earth, in other wars, in other forgotten corners of the universe. To them, fear wasn't new. It was just another shadow they had learned to walk through. From the horizon came the invaders' machines, giant structures of steel and light, crawling like insects across the plains. They were built for destruction, not mercy. They didn't speak, they didn't feel, and they didn't stop. The Illyri had once tried to fight them with what little strength they had, but their weapons were weak, made for defense, not battle. Compassion had been their way of life. But compassion alone hadn't saved them from the machines. Now, for the first time, they watched creatures from another world stand in their defense, creatures they had once feared. The humans formed a line just outside the main camp. The commander gave a single nod, and rows of Terran drones lifted into the air, their engines humming softly like a heartbeat. The machines of Earth were not beautiful. They were rugged, practical, and built for survival. But when they moved, they looked alive, guided not by cold logic but by human will. When the first wave of the enemy came close, the Terrans didn't rush forward. They waited, silent, patient, like hunters who understood their prey. Then in one unified motion, they struck. The Illyri saw beams of light cut through the sky, sharp and controlled. The noise was deafening yet oddly rhythmic, like thunder given purpose. The ground erupted as explosions rolled through the darkness, but the Terrans didn't waver. They moved in patterns, covering one another, pulling the wounded back, pushing forward when it was safe. To the Illyri, it looked like chaos, but to the Terrans, it was art. The art of surviving, of protecting, of doing what had to be done. Inside the shelters, the Illyri leaders watched through trembling screens. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. The humans were not fighting like conquerors. They were fighting like guardians. They didn't destroy everything in their path. They avoided civilian zones, shielding the weak even in the heat of battle. At one point, an Illyri child ran from a shelter, confused and terrified, straight toward the open field. The humans saw it instantly. One soldier broke formation, sprinting through fire and smoke, his armor scorched by heat. He reached the child, shielding it with his body just as debris fell from above. When the dust cleared, the child was safe, and the human, covered in soot and bruises, lifted the small being and carried it back to the camp. The Illyri who saw that moment couldn't stop crying. They had never known that such power could carry such care. The fight went on for hours. Each time the enemy pushed, the Terrans pushed back harder. They didn't yell or roar. Their silence was louder than any battle cry. When the machines tried to flank from the sides, Terran drones cut them off. When they attacked from above, the humans used their ships as shields, absorbing the damage to protect the ground forces. Even in war, they showed restraint. They destroyed only what they had to. As dawn approached, the sky slowly changed from purple to gold. The sound of gunfire faded into distant echoes. The last of the invaders' machines lay broken across the plains, smoking quietly under the early light. The humans didn't celebrate. They didn't raise flags or shout victory. They simply stood there for a moment, breathing hard, looking out over what was left. Then one by one they began helping the wounded, both human and Illyri. When the Illyri dared to step outside, they were met with silence. The once terrifying Terrans were walking among the ruins, carrying the injured, giving water, repairing shelters. Their armor was cracked, their faces smeared with dirt, but their eyes were gentle. One of the Illyri elders approached the commander slowly, unsure what to say. "You risked everything," the elder whispered through the translator. "Why? You could have left us." The commander looked at the sunrise, then at the fragile being before him. "Because someone had to stand up for you," he said quietly. "Compassion isn't just words. It's action." The Illyri didn't answer. They simply bowed their head, overwhelmed by emotions they couldn't describe. As the day passed, the humans and Illyri worked together to bury the fallen, both species side by side. The humans treated every body with respect, whether enemy or friend. They didn't curse the dead. They just gave them peace. That small act touched the Illyri deeply. They had expected warriors, not healers. They had expected conquerors, not caretakers. But these Terrans were something different, something the galaxy had not seen before. Later that night, when the fires burned low, a group of Illyri gathered near one of the Terran medics. The medic was cleaning equipment, exhausted but still focused. The aliens sat quietly watching the human work. Finally, one of them spoke through the translator. "We thought you were monsters," they said softly. "Everyone in the galaxy said humans were dangerous." The medic looked up, pausing for a moment before replying. "Maybe we are," they said. "But sometimes the monsters are the only ones willing to protect the gentle ones." No one said anything after that. The stars above shimmered silently, and in that silence something unspoken passed between them. Understanding. Over the next few days, the Illyri slowly began to see the truth with their own eyes. The Terrans didn't seek glory or control. They stayed only long enough to make sure the survivors could live safely. They taught them how to defend themselves, how to rebuild, how to protect their own skies. Children who had once run in fear now followed the humans around with curiosity. They tried to imitate their steps, their gestures, their bravery. The humans didn't push them away. They showed them simple things: how to light a campfire, how to lift tools, how to listen to the sound of the wind to predict weather. It was small, quiet, and human. But not everything was calm. Scans showed that remnants of the enemy fleet still lingered in orbit, hiding among debris. The Terrans knew that one final fight might come before peace truly returned. They didn't tell the Illyri. They didn't want to fill their fragile hearts with fear again. They just prepared silently, building shields around the planet, readying their defenses. On the last night before departure, the humans and Illyri gathered together under the stars. There was no ceremony, no speeches, just silence broken only by the crackle of fire. The Illyri leader finally spoke. "You came when no one else would. You saved us when we were ready to give up. We will never forget." The commander nodded, his voice calm but heavy. "We didn't do it for thanks. We did it because compassion means standing up even when it hurts, even when the world calls you a monster." For a moment, everyone sat in silence, watching the stars above them, the same stars that had carried that desperate signal across galaxies, the same stars that had brought monsters and dreamers together. When the Terran ships finally left orbit days later, the Illyri stood on the rebuilt fields, watching the engines light up the sky. They didn't see monsters anymore. They saw guardians, scarred, imperfect, but good. They didn't wave goodbye with fear this time. They waved with gratitude. And as the last human ship vanished into the darkness, the Illyri made a promise to their children. "If you ever hear a voice from the stars crying for help, you must answer it. Because once long ago we cried and the Terrans came. That day a legend was born, not of war, not of conquest, but of compassion carried by hands strong enough to protect it." Across the stars, other civilizations would soon hear whispers of this story. They would speak of the Deathworlders, the Terran monsters who came not to destroy but to heal. And slowly the galaxy would learn what the Illyri had already discovered, that sometimes the most dangerous creatures in the universe are the ones with the deepest hearts. The dawn broke slowly over the alien world, painting the skies in soft shades of violet and gold. The Terrans had spent the night in quiet preparation, knowing that the remnants of the invaders were still out there, lurking, waiting for weakness. For the Illyri, the world had begun to feel safer. For the first time in weeks, they dared to step outside the shelters and explore the ruined cities with cautious hope. They could see the humans moving among the ruins, repairing, cleaning, protecting. But the Terrans knew peace would not last forever. They had come to help, yes, but they had also come to protect. Compassion alone could not survive if the threat still existed. And so, with calm determination, they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The enemy's machines began to appear again at the edge of the horizon. They moved slower than before, as if wary of the humans, yet their intent was clear. They were still deadly. They were still relentless. But the Terrans were ready. They had spent days studying the terrain, learning every hill, every valley, every ruined street. They positioned their defenses carefully, not recklessly, not with arrogance, but with precision born from survival. The Illyri watched silently, hiding behind walls and broken buildings. They had begun to trust the humans, but fear lingered. Could these creatures of strength and metal protect them against an enemy they could barely understand? Could they survive again? Then the first clash happened. The Terrans didn't rush forward with anger or hatred. They waited. They observed. They chose their moments. When the invaders approached, the Terrans moved as one. Drones lifted into the sky, scanning and intercepting. Ground forces formed lines that seemed immovable. Every human carried the weight of countless experiences, every movement precise, every decision calculated. They were terrifying to watch, yet they were protecting, not destroying. The first wave of machines fell quickly, dismantled with a mix of speed and intelligence. The Illyri could hardly believe their eyes. It looked like a dance, violent yet beautiful, destructive yet careful. The Terrans did not strike indiscriminately. They spared structures, avoided harm to civilians, and focused solely on stopping the enemy. At one point, a massive machine broke through a perimeter, heading straight toward a group of hiding Illyri. A Terran soldier saw it, sprinted forward and leaped onto the machine, clinging to its moving frame. With precise movements, he dismantled its control panel while keeping the machine away from the survivors. When the danger passed, he stood up, dusted himself off, and continued moving with the others as if nothing had happened. The Illyri could only stare in awe. They had called for compassion, and they had expected words, comfort, maybe food or shelter. They did not expect warriors who carried the same care they had asked for. As the day went on, the fighting continued. But it was not chaotic. The Terrans worked like a single organism, covering one another, protecting those in their care. Every human action was calculated, and yet every human action was filled with the quiet weight of empathy. They fought because they had to, yes, but also because they understood the meaning of protection. During one lull in the battle, the Illyri stepped cautiously into the streets. They saw humans tending to wounded survivors, both alien and enemy, moving quietly under the shadow of destruction. Machines that had been enemies yesterday were now carefully dismantled, with their components removed and saved for study. There was no joy in destruction, only the discipline of necessity. The Illyri realized something remarkable. The humans were capable of terrible force, yet they used it with the restraint of those who had seen suffering firsthand. They were not monsters in the way others had feared. They were monsters who understood kindness because they had endured cruelty themselves. As the sun began to set, the Terrans had pushed the enemy back. The skies were filled with smoke, the ground littered with debris, and the air heavy with the smell of burnt metal and ash. Yet despite the devastation, the Illyri felt something they had not felt in a long time: safety. For the first time, they dared to hope that life could continue. That night, the humans worked alongside the Illyri to rebuild. They repaired shelters, cleared debris, and set up systems for clean water and food distribution. They did not rest, and yet they worked with patience, speaking softly to the Illyri, offering reassurance. One young Illyri, curious and brave, watched a human medic carefully tend to an injured adult. The human's hands were steady, their eyes focused, their voice gentle. When the medic finished, they helped the adult to their feet and guided them to a safe shelter. The Illyri child ran to the medic, shyly offering a small glowing flower from their world. The human accepted it with a nod and a smile, setting it on their workstation. It was a small gesture, but it carried meaning far beyond words. Compassion, they realized, was not in grand speeches or promises. It was in moments like this, quiet, deliberate, and real. The Terrans did not stop at helping the Illyri alone. They began mapping the surrounding territory, detecting hidden dangers, and preparing for any new threats. Every step was a balance between caution and courage. Even the machines left behind by the enemy were examined carefully, dismantled safely, and repurposed when possible. Nothing was wasted, and nothing was left to endanger the fragile survivors. By the third day, the Illyri were helping the humans in small ways. They carried supplies, shared local knowledge, and even guided some of the Terrans through dangerous terrain. It was a fragile trust, but it was growing stronger. The commander gathered the team briefly and reminded them, "This is not over. There are still threats out there, but for now we protect life. That is our mission." It was not said with pride or arrogance. It was said with quiet determination, and with the understanding that compassion was not weakness. It was courage. Over the next week, the Illyri began to rebuild more confidently. They cleared rubble, repaired buildings, and planted small gardens. The humans showed them techniques to purify water, store food, and create shelters that could withstand minor attacks. Every lesson carried with it a subtle message. Compassion is action. Protection is kindness. Survival is care. The Illyri children, once frightened and timid, now ran through the camps laughing, playing games under the watchful eyes of Terran soldiers. The adults began to smile again, their eyes regaining warmth. The world, even scarred and broken, started to feel alive once more. And yet the humans never lowered their guard. Scans continued to detect distant signals of enemy machines still lurking. The Terrans knew that at any moment, the peace they had helped rebuild could be shattered. But they did not let this fear influence their care for the Illyri. They had learned long ago that true protection requires patience and balance, strength tempered with empathy. One evening, the Illyri leader approached the commander quietly. "Your people, you fight and heal at the same time. How can you do both?" The commander paused, looking out over the small camp where humans and Illyri work side by side. "Because we know what it is to lose everything," he said softly. "We know fear. We know helplessness. If we can stop it for others, we do. That is what compassion looks like." The Illyri looked at the humans in awe. They had called for help, expecting mercy, expecting care. What they received was something beyond their imagination, a force capable of incredible destruction, yet guided by the gentlest hands. By the end of the week, the enemy machines were scattered and inactive. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the lesson had been clear. The Terrans were not here to conquer or dominate. They were here to protect, to guide, to heal, and to teach. The Illyri now understood the truth about the so-called Terran monsters. They were not just warriors. They were guardians. They were terrifying in their strength, but boundless in their care. They had answered the plea for compassion not with words, but with action, bravery, and a courage born from deep understanding of suffering. That night, as the fires burned low and the survivors slept safely in rebuilt shelters, the humans gathered quietly. They did not speak of glory nor of victory. They spoke softly among themselves, sharing observations, checking equipment, and preparing for whatever might come next. In the hearts of the Illyri, gratitude was now mixed with awe. They had survived the worst of the invaders, and in the process, they had learned a new understanding of what it meant to be strong, and what it meant to be compassionate. The Terrans had come as monsters in the stories of the galaxy, but to the Illyri, they had become something greater, protectors of the fragile, bearers of hope, and living proof that true compassion can exist even in the harshest of hearts. And as the stars shone quietly above the scarred world, the Illyri whispered to one another, "If mercy can come in the form of monsters, perhaps the universe is not so cruel after all." The world had begun to breathe again. What had once been silence and ruin now carried movement, voices, and life. The Illyri were no longer hiding in fear. They walked openly among the rebuilt shelters, curious children running alongside adults who had once been too weak or too scared to even leave their homes. The Terrans had been there for weeks, and every day they worked not just to protect, but to teach, guide, and give hope. The humans moved with quiet discipline. Some repaired structures, others purified water, and a few continued to patrol the outskirts, ensuring no dormant threats could harm the survivors. But unlike before, they did not move like conquerors. Their strength, once terrifying, now felt comforting to the Illyri. The sky above was clear for the first time in months. Light broke through thin clouds, reflecting off strange alien buildings and the scattered fires of yesterday. Birds, or something like birds, sang softly in the distance, their songs unfamiliar but gentle. The Illyri paused to listen, their translucent skin glowing faintly in the sunlight. For the first time they could feel peace, even as echoes of destruction lingered in memory. The commander of the Terrans walked slowly through the camp. His face was worn, his eyes tired, but there was a calm authority in his presence. The Illyri watched him with awe, for they had learned that his strength was not in weapons or machines, but in his ability to protect, to care, and to act when it mattered most. A small group of Illyri approached him cautiously. They carried simple gifts, polished stones, woven cords, and small glowing plants from their world. Each offering was a symbol of gratitude, a gesture from a culture that had learned the true meaning of compassion. "You have given us life," one elder whispered through the translator. "We did not know that the beings you call monsters could be so gentle." The commander nodded. He picked up one of the glowing plants and held it carefully. "Strength and kindness can exist together," he said. "Sometimes the world calls those who survive the harshest storms monsters. But surviving doesn't make us cruel. It makes us responsible for protecting the fragile." The Illyri looked at one another, their eyes wide with understanding. They began to see the Terrans not as terrifying creatures but as guardians, beings whose courage was matched only by their care. The day continued with rebuilding efforts. The humans taught the Illyri how to create stronger shelters, how to manage clean water and food supplies, and how to organize themselves to prevent future destruction. Slowly, the survivors began to take control of their world again. Their fear had not disappeared, but it was tempered by trust. A trust hard-earned through action, not words. Children ran alongside the Terrans, learning to carry small tools, imitate gestures, and practice safety drills. It was a small, quiet joy, but it carried enormous meaning. For the first time, the Illyri felt that life could go on, not as victims, but as a people capable of hope and resilience. At the edge of the camp, the scouts reported distant movement again. The remnants of the enemy had not vanished entirely. Machines, dormant and damaged, were still out there. The Terrans prepared quietly, setting up new defenses, repairing old ones, and remaining vigilant. But they did not panic. They had faced the same threats countless times before and had learned that fear does not protect. Only readiness, patience, and courage do. As evening fell, the Terrans gathered the Illyri together around a series of small fires. The sky above was a swirl of colors, purple fading into gold, then dark blue. The first stars of the evening appeared, tiny lights scattered across the sky like scattered promises. The commander addressed the group quietly, not with speeches but with words meant to linger in the heart. "We came because someone called for help. You did not ask for warriors, but for compassion. And compassion is not passive. It requires action. It requires strength. Sometimes it requires standing between danger and those who cannot defend themselves." The Illyri listened intently. They had called for help expecting kindness, but they had received so much more. They had received guardians who could protect without cruelty, who could fight without hatred, and who could act with both wisdom and empathy. That night, the fires burned low. Children slept safely in tents, their small bodies wrapped in warm blankets provided by the Terrans. Adults sat quietly, talking softly, repairing items, and reflecting on the weeks that had passed. The world was far from perfect, but it was healing. The seeds of a new beginning had been planted, and this time, they could take root. In the days that followed, the Illyri learned more about the humans. They saw scars on faces, marks of past battles, and the quiet weight carried in every movement. They learned that these so-called monsters were not born cruel. They were shaped by hardship, forged in struggle, and tempered by survival. It was this combination, strength born from suffering, tempered by compassion, that allowed them to act in ways no one else could. The Illyri began to take small steps toward independence. They repaired buildings, cleaned streets, and organized water and food supplies. The Terrans watched closely, ready to intervene if needed, but encouraging the survivors to reclaim their world. By teaching, protecting, and leading by example, the humans helped the Illyri regain not only safety but confidence. One evening, the commander walked to the edge of a cliff overlooking the rebuilt city. He was not alone. An Illyri elder joined him quietly without fear. Together they looked out at the world below, still scarred, still broken, but alive. "You have given us hope," the elder said. "We feared the worst, and yet you proved us wrong." The commander nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "We all fear the worst at times," he said. "But fear does not define us. Actions do. Every choice we make shows who we truly are." The elder bowed their head, understanding at last. The Terrans had not come to dominate, to conquer, or to rule. They had come to act with courage, and in doing so they had redefined what it meant to be strong. As the sun rose the next morning, the Terrans prepared to depart. Their work was done, for now. The Illyri had enough knowledge, strength, and hope to continue their rebuilding. The humans had taught them how to survive, protect, and heal. But even more important, they had shown that compassion could be fierce, courageous, and unyielding. The Illyri gathered on the fields to watch the ships take off. Their eyes glowed faintly in the light of dawn, reflecting both gratitude and awe. They had called for help, expecting mercy, and they had received strength paired with care. They had called for kindness, and they had received guardians capable of protecting it. The humans lifted off slowly, engines glowing, leaving trails of light that stretched across the sky. The Illyri waved, their small hands trembling. For the first time, they did not fear the future. They knew they were no longer alone, and they knew that if the galaxy ever turned against them again, there were beings far away who would answer their call. As the ships disappeared into the stars, a quiet promise lingered in the air. The Illyri whispered it to one another. If mercy can come in the form of monsters, then hope can survive anywhere. And across the vast reaches of space, the Terrans carried that same promise in their hearts. They had traveled far, faced danger, and acted with both strength and empathy. Their story would spread slowly, quietly through whispers and legend, teaching others that true monsters are not those who fight. They are those who fail to act when action is needed. In the weeks and months that followed, the Illyri continued to rebuild. Their cities rose from the ashes, stronger and more resilient than before. Their children played freely, their adults worked with purpose, and the memory of fear slowly faded, replaced by hope. And in every quiet corner of the repaired world, the Illyri remembered the Terrans not as monsters, not as invaders, but as the ones who had arrived when no one else would, the ones who had answered a simple plea for compassion, and in doing so, had forever changed the course of their world. Because sometimes, the greatest acts of kindness are carried not by gentle hands alone, but by hands strong enough to defend, heal, and protect. And sometimes, monsters are exactly what the universe needs.